Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Welcome to the Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook webinar. I'm David Beard. I am with the Children in Nature Network. We're a national organization that supports children's access to nature in a myriad of ways, and we're one of four key partners in the Youth Outdoor Policy Partnership. And really, the webinar today is really focused on the web tool, the policy playbook that you can go into and find out all kinds of information, look at actual policy, see some community spotlights, and we'll kind of walk through that today. I'm calling in from Seattle, Washington. As you can see my background here, land of the Duwamish and other Coast Salish tribes. And there are many ways that you can support tribes in your communities. And really excited to be on Duwamish lands. Let's go to the next slide. As you're looking through the website today, we have a couple of ways that you can access information. So I'm going to walk through it quickly. We're then going to turn it over to some of our partners to actually talk about the trends, and then we'll have a panel to dissect what's really happening out there in policy, communications, what we're expecting, and you'll see that today. So who is this partnership that puts together this tool? Well, the Children in Nature Network, along with our partners at the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, the North American Association of Environmental Education, NAAE, and Nuestra Tierra, which is a New Mexico-based organization that does some fantastic both program work and policy work in New Mexico and is helping us as a state partner at the national level. Next slide. This is what, if you go on the web page, we just want to kind of give you some familiarity with it. And you'll see at the top, it's pretty well laid out about whatever you need, you can get to quickly. This is the About page, as well as the Donate page to Incel, our great partners there that help run this engine. Next slide. So in the About, if you want to learn more about any of the partners or why we do this or how this is funded, you can check that out as well, in addition to the policy library and our annual trends report, which we'll be highlighting here in a second. Next slide. In the policy areas, one of the things that we do to help dissect this information a little more digestible is actually have the highlights in some buckets. So whether that's, sort of environmental literacy and education, whether that's early childhood, some other green schoolyards, parks, we kind of separate it out so you can kind of get to what you're looking for. This vast universe of children in nature covers a lot of different sectors and different issue areas. So this can help drill down into exactly the area that you want to drill down into. And this is just a map of where we saw action in 2024. So almost every single state that had a legislative session, and note that I don't believe North Dakota, Nevada, or Texas had legislative sessions this year. I'm not sure about Indiana, what was going on there. But almost every single state and territory additionally had some sort of policy related to children and nature in some sort of way, whether that was access, environmental justice, education policy, whatever that was. There were some really cool, meaty things that we were seeing happening across the country, some of which passed and some of which didn't. And we hope that we'll see carried forward into this next legislative season, which will start in January. Next slide. So these are the folks that you're gonna hear from today, and they'll introduce themselves. I'm the Director of Policy and Government Relations at Children in Nature Network. We also have Kendall Scott, who is the Outdoor Education Lead at the Nevada Department of Outdoor Recreation. Grant Glenecki, who is the Outdoor Policy Coordinator with the Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and Megan Fink, who is with NAAE. And we're also excited to have join us Senator Janice Marchman with Colorado State Senate, who is also a teacher and really helped lead in some early childhood and nature work there in Colorado. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Grant to talk a little bit more about what did happen this year. Grant.
Yeah. Next slide, please. I am Grant Glinietsky. I am the Outdoor Policy Coordinator for the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. I am coming to you from Nquayjong or Lansing, Michigan, which is the Anishinaabe, like Odawa and Ojibwe land. I would love to talk to you really quickly about first why we focus on states. So the Youth Outdoor Policy Playbook primarily focuses on state level action. Part of that reason is because state legislators need our help. Out of the 50 state legislatures, only 40 of them are 40 of them are considered part-time, meaning they only meet for part of the year, while only 3 actually meet full-time. Most legislators receive relatively small salaries compared to their average constituent, but there is a large range, with California state legislators earning $107,000 and New Mexico state legislators receiving zero salary for their work. Very few legislators have year-round full-time staff, and others lack dedicated policy staff even during session. This is really important because legislators do a lot of jobs all at once. For example, in the New York State Senate, you might see a senator having 6, 7, or 8 staffers all working for them because they're handling constituent services, community outreach. They have to research every bill that comes across their desk to make sure that they understand what's being voted on and why. They have to be looking at what's happening nationally to see if there's other things that they can look at in other states. So that's where my job comes in. I serve as a remote environmental staffer, just focused on outdoor policy. But I don't have access to the sort of local information that you have as like advocates and leaders in your own communities. So it's important to get connected to your legislators. Next slide, please. The other reason to get connected with state level policy is even if only all you care about is federal policy, state policy is the way to go. In the current Congress, 46% of senators and 45% of representatives served in a state legislature previously. It's a lot easier to get connected to a state legislator and their staffers than just to get connected to a congressperson, in part because of how state legislatures are structured, and in part because I'm just biased here. I think state legislators are very friendly and gregarious people that are doing the work because they care about what is happening in their local community and their constituency in ways that Congress people aren't necessarily always afforded the ability to care. And it's also because states are laboratories of democracy. It's very flexible and easier to have an innovative and novel approach at a state level because states are constantly experimenting. You might see a policy that takes 5, 10, or 20 years to pass at a federal level pass in as little as 1 year at a state level. Typically, it takes 2 to 5 years for something to pass at a state level. But I have seen multiple times something get introduced and passed just in 1 year, including some really novel and exciting things that we'll talk about a little bit later. Lastly, many issues are primarily state level, or they need state capacity for implementation. So looking at state curriculums, although that also has to do with agencies, you do need to look at involving the legislature at that point. Or looking at how schools are designed or funded, looking at how property taxes are levied or distributed, looking at whether or not there's a real estate tax that goes to green space equity programs, things like that. And there's also the need for state capacity for implementation in the sense that if you don't have a way to distribute and identify how funds should be distributed, you don't have access to those funds, just to be frank. For example, there's the STORM Act at a federal level, which promotes resilience. There are a lot of states that don't have any access to that federal fund because they haven't passed legislation to get access to it. Next slide, please. So with all that in mind, I would love to give you a really quick overview of our trend report. Our actual trend report is only 7 pages long. I recommend taking a look at it, but we go through 358 bills that were introduced in 48 states and territories, and we highlight just some of the 82 bills that were enacted in 35 states and territories. We look for trends to try and identify what would be most helpful for us to keep an eye on in the future. In this case, this year, we saw the most growth in access, equity, learning, and health. Next slide, please. And we look at a couple different buckets of categories, as David mentioned. One of our policy areas is outdoor equity and justice. In Iowa, they'll be studying disability accessibility in state parks and make recommendations. They also appropriated $1.3 million for state parks improvements focused on disability accessibility. And these are just some examples of what was passed. We can't cover everything. Maryland will require all newly built public playgrounds to include communication boards, and those are boards with simple illustrations or photos of commonly talked about playground topics so that adults and children can point at them to communicate with each other across abilities and languages. And Virginia established a 2-year pilot program providing all-terrain power wheelchairs in state parks. That'll start out in 6 state parks, and they'll be developing guidelines for a state-level program across the entire state with disabled park users. Next slide. Thank you. In outdoor health and well-being, Delaware recognize the importance of swimming safety and awareness. If you're familiar with state policy, you might notice that this is a resolution, and resolutions are often thought of as less powerful than bills because bills become state law, resolutions do not. However, a resolution does set the intent of the legislature, and it's something that the legislature has to come to agreement and consensus on. So it's a good way to start building into the idea that this is something that we can legislate and work on together. Maryland will prohibit new playground surfacing materials with lead and PFAS in all newly built public playgrounds. And Minnesota requires serious accidents on trails to be reported and documented. That's pretty critical because it allows them to identify high risk intersections and areas. This can also be relevant to looking at like a safer route to school program. So next slide. In outdoor and environmental education, we saw that Colorado established a high school diploma endorsement in climate literacy. This one's especially exciting to me because looking at other high school diploma endorsement programs, it's often been inequitable in terms of who gets access to and who can actually apply for and get the endorsement. This one is focused on experiential learning and growth, so is an equity-minded diploma endorsement. I'm very excited about that one. Colorado established outdoor preschool licensing, which we will hear more about in a little bit. But just very briefly, outdoor preschool licensing is vital because without it, a lot of daycare centers and after school centers can only operate for a half day. Outdoor preschools can only operate for a half day without licensing, which is a huge barrier. And then there's also significant lack of access to subsidies and funding at both the federal and state level without access to licensing. So outdoor preschools that are licensed are more accessible to low-income families and broader communities in general. And lastly, Puerto Rico integrated climate mitigation, resilience, and justice into their state-required curriculum. This is building on a 2018 law that made it so that climate education is part of state curriculum. The intention of this bill was to focus on hope and resilience, looking at the ways that the climate crisis can be solved, which I think is a really beautiful approach. Next slide. Lastly, I want to look at outdoor access and leadership. So Louisiana also had a resolution that was requesting for the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife to find ways to increase youth use of wildlife management areas. That's another way a resolution can be very helpful, is because it can direct agencies to look into specific ideas. This can be really helpful for agencies that are wanting to look into it, but just need a directive or need to clarify what their role or purpose is in order to start working on that. Maine authorized $28 million in general bonds to develop trails and active transport opportunities. Again, another potential safer routes to school approach could be used there. And Washington will allow the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, to assess fees for the use of agency-managed land for events. This can be a great way to improve the quality and quantity of community event spaces. We've seen that be very successful in Indiana, where their state parks have really beautiful community spaces that are also great for events because they have both the incentive and access to funding to create those high quality spaces. There are limits on how often they can be used for commercial events to make sure that those spaces are still available to the public. But with that, next slide. I encourage you to take a look at our trend report and get a sense for a little bit more of what we were talking about. This is just skimming the surface, but I wanted to save you a little bit of time today. So with that, I will hand it back to David to give a little bit more on the election debrief.
Yes, and just know that we will have a Q&A after the panel. So if you have any questions about, I mean, not that we know every detail of all those policies, but we can certainly, if we do know anything, you want to know more or want to dive into some of the trends that we saw, there will be a Q&A portion for that coming up in a little bit. All right, next slide. In case you didn't hear, we had a little election, and maybe there are some changes a brewing. I think we all know that what happened at the federal level, and I'll maybe just start there, and that it will be challenging for states if there are major funding cuts. If they make major funding cuts to major programs, whether that be even programs that don't necessarily relate to children and nature, it's going to have an impact on state budgets because many of them are going to need or want to make up for any sort of lost money. For instance, if there are major cuts to healthcare, states are going to need to step in or going to want to, at least some states. So that is going to have a big impact that can't be underestimated, I think, as you all think about state policies and what things may cost. I know there are 6, I was just reading yesterday, there are 6 states that are going, including my own and here in Washington, where they're going to a major budget challenge this coming session. So as you all think about either starting policies or joining efforts to move these different policies, that sort of can't be understated what's happening in the federal level, and we do need to pay attention to that for state and even for local work because it will have a reverberating impact. Um, it's sort of working from the bottom up, but there was good news. Over 100 billion in ballot initiative funding for parks and green spaces at both local and state levels around the country. So we saw a lot of folks approving, and that's just parks and green spaces. There were also a ton of measures that passed for children's programming around the country too. So to say that, so it's exciting that taxpayers in certain many pockets, and by the way, this wasn't even just sort of big blue cities and big blue states. There were wins all across the country, and so can't underestimate that the general public out there does have support for some of these issues. However, they may come to nature. For some folks, that's about environmental literacy and climate solutions, and for others, it's about hunting and fishing and just a love of nature. So, however we can get to these wins and message the importance of nature, I think we'll really have to take into account in this next year at the state level. Um, and then as we look at that top bullet about state legislative partisan control, so which party controls which your houses or your senates, except for Nebraska, where they only have a senate, or there was 11 governorships that were on the line, and even if you look at the federal results, there actually wasn't a huge sea change. Trump barely won the presidency. The Republicans are barely hanging on to the House, and the Senate did flip several seats, but it's still a fairly narrow majority. And the same thing happened at the state legislative level, where we only saw, I believe, last time I looked, there were only 3 chambers that flipped, or that one that went into a tie. The gubernatorial map looks exactly the same as it did before the election. So there actually wasn't a whole ton of change at the state level. That being said, of course, some legislators leave office and retire as they are well have earned, and so there's definitely some new legislators and some new leadership that's certainly happening, but not a lot of change overall, which can be good because you can sort of look at what happened in last year's session and or whenever your session last was to kind of help you determine some of your strategies and your messaging for state level policy a little bit easier because you don't necessarily have a huge change there. So kind of a good thing. But now just to talk a little bit about some state level efforts, I'm actually going to hand it over to Megan to talk a bit about environmental literacy.
Thanks, David. We just wanted to spend a brief moment lifting up the work of our Coalition for Climate Education Policy. My name is Megan Fink. I work for the North American Association of Environmental Education, and this coalition is comprised of dozens of like-minded organizations working to advance climate literacy for a just and sustainable future. If you're interested in learning more about this work, please check out our website, or if you're interested in joining the coalition, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are working really hard to advance climate education and ensure that education and engagement are part of the toolbox of solutions to build more resilient communities, advance justice and equity, and create a climate-ready workforce. So please do check out the website to see all the different case studies that have been pulled together by this awesome coalition, learn about how climate change in higher education policy is playing out, the K through 12 climate education policy landscape is looking, but we particularly wanted to lift up the climate education policy toolkit that has been coming together over the past few years. And of relevance to David's points earlier about the election, you can find in this toolkit messaging that resonates with all audiences. So we've kind of put together framing if you live in a more climate hesitant state or a climate education supportive environment. We've noticed, and we've all been planning on reframing the messaging we're using so that we're making sure we reach a broad coalition, and we want to make sure that everyone feels included. So for instance, mental health is something we can all agree needs spotlighting and needs to be lifted up in our country, and spending time outside in nature is a great way for everyone to get there. So that's a strategy listed under our climate hesitant states as one that will really reach anyone where they are and resonate deeply with all people who care about children, about nature, about protecting these beautiful places we love so much, and advancing justice and equity for our communities. So do check out that toolkit. It's broken up into 2 easy steps: understanding your local context, and then resources to help you see your policies over the finish line. You can also find examples of those policies back on the Youth Outdoor Policy Partnership website. If you're interested more in climate education, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks so much. I'm going to kick it back to David for a shout out for early childhood education.
That's right. Get them into nature early. It's never too soon. I mean, we're even talking prenatal here. How do we work with new and expectant parents on engaging in nature, the importance of nature, the benefits of nature? And so a collaborative has formed. And if you're like, wait, I didn't hear about this, don't worry, because we were having our very first meeting on December 16th. We had a kickoff to really start an effort, which we're calling the Outdoor and Nature-Based Early Care and Education. I'm not going to lie. I'm really hoping we can get to a better name than that. But right now, OMBEC is where we're at. And those are just some examples of the different policies that we're going to be focused on. And we're really looking at every level, whether that, technical assistance to states, localities, and the federal government about how we impact policy and public funding to really support kids' access to nature at very young ages and engagement and learning from and just enjoying nature. So if it's something you think you might be interested in, please feel free to reach out to me, David at childrenandnature.org, and I can get you connected to those efforts. Also in chat, you'll see our Children in Nature Networks, the National League of Cities, have a Early Childhood and Nature Connections toolkit as well, which dives a little bit deeper, not so much into the policy, although that will be coming soon, but more just about what is early childhood in nature and what does that look like. So be sure to check that out. Well, with that, I'm going to hand it back to Megan to have our esteemed panel come up and dive a little bit more into what is going on out there. Megan.
Thanks. Yeah, we are honored today to have Kendall Scott with the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation and State Senator Janice Marchman from Colorado to share a little bit more about what's happening in their states. It's exciting and new in youth outdoor policy. But I'm going to let them introduce themselves first. Kendall, I'll kick it to you and then over to Janice, and we'll get into some questions.
Thanks, Megan. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kendall Scott, and I am the outdoor education lead for the Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation. We are an office within the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources for the state of Nevada. And I do policy work and technical assistance around the state of Nevada and often in rural communities, helping to develop education programming and also manage a grant program that's focused on funding outdoor education and recreation opportunities for youth in Nevada.
Great. I will go ahead and start. My name is State Senator Janice Marchman. I am starting my third session of my first term in January. And I am a teacher. Like David said, I teach middle school. It's awesome. Lots of fun smells and sounds and words that they say. So we got to get these kids into nature. And it is literally that drives me to get kids into nature at early ages. So my background, I have an engineering degree from Georgia Tech. I worked in that field for several years, and then I had the privilege of getting to stay home with my kiddos for 13 years to raise them. During that time, I got an early childhood education credential. And so very invested into what early childhood education can look like, and also understanding there are custodial benefits to the early childhood program in general, and how important the outdoor portion of it is. So I'm excited to talk about everything, but that's me. Oh, I'm also on the education committee, obviously. I'm the vice chair, and so yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Janice, I apologize. I feel like your sound is a little crackly. Am I the only one hearing that?
It probably is. I'm having every technical failure possible. So I'm off my AirPods. I'm literally sitting in the Capitol just on my phone. So apologies. I will try to hold my phone up. Is this any better?
You know what? You're amazing. I can hear you. And thank you so much for zooming in right after a meeting in the Capitol. We're gonna dive right into the first question, which Janet, you kind of Janice, you touched on, but I would love to hear you expand a little bit more. Kendall, we'll start with you on why and how you got involved with outdoor policy efforts.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. And it was, you can hear me now. I put my
That's way
AirPods
better.
in. Okay. Yay. Okay. Let's hope they stick around. Okay. So, how and why I got into this, I have a passion for public education, and I feel like everyone should have the ability and the access to get the type of education that's going to work best for them. More and more, we're having kiddos who are being identified as neurodivergent earlier. And this type of a curriculum is so good for these kids when done correctly. And so that is another passion, that I have. So I think, people brought me the bill. It was my honor to get it. But when it came time to run a bill in this space around, providing access for everyone to be able to access outdoor education, they chose me, and I was really honored that they did, and look forward to seeing it successfully implemented and talking about kind of some of that policy too.
Yeah, so my background is in the outdoor recreation field. I have a couple degrees in that, and I've worked at camps and in both formal and informal education. I did my graduate work at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, and at the same time was also working with Salt Lake City Public Lands. And my master's project revolved around developing the Salt Lake City Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights with the city, and we used a theory-based approach to develop a Bill of Rights that would intentionally form place attachments between youth in Salt Lake and their local public lands. And so we brought together partners from all over the city to kind of program those rights or those different activities that we believe every kid growing up in Salt Lake should be able to experience. And it was a really awesome experience overall. The mayor endorsed the Bill of Rights and signed a resolution, and so my first stab at policy work was really at the city level, and then the past couple of years I've been working for the state of Nevada as the outdoor education lead for Nevada Division of Outdoor Recreation, or NDOR, you might hear me refer to it as, for any Star Wars fans out there. um, and so in our last legislative session, we are a part-time legislature. They meet every other year. So our last session was in 2023. Our Assembly Speaker, Steve Yeager, who is a NSL member and a champion for youth in the outdoors and outdoor recreation in general, he came to our division looking for an outdoor recreation focused bill idea. And myself and a former supervisor proposed an idea that he ran with. So Speaker Yeager was able to pass this bill that created a temporary advisory working group, or we refer to it as AWG, who was charged with studying ways to integrate the outdoors into Nevada schools. And Endor was charged with kind of leading that effort. And I'll talk more about that group later. But when that bill was passed, I was in a place where I had to lead this big advisory working group project, and I had never worked at a state policy level, and I had also just lost that kind of leadership capacity who had been supporting me thus far on the project. So I went to the annual Nature Everywhere conference that the Children of Nature Network hosts, and for the first time in 2023, and learned about their new Nature Everywhere Accelerator Community Initiative. And so that they do with the National League of Cities and with Kaboom. So I applied on behalf of AWG to be a Nature Everywhere Accelerator community, and we were one of the first state projects ever selected, which was really exciting. So we've had the support of Nature Everywhere over the past year, which has included technical assistance and peer learning from other communities across the country doing this work. All important funding. David is actually our technical assistance lead and has been on this journey with us, helping us to do research and helping me write and plan meetings and being there to lament over how silly and crazy policy work can be sometimes. So the whole Nature Everywhere experience has been really helpful for me as I worked on state policy for the first time.
That's incredibly helpful to hear. All right, everyone, get out there and sign up for Nature Everywhere. It sounds fantastic. Next question we were curious to hear your thoughts on is what youth and nature-related efforts are taking shape in your state that you'd like to highlight for us. Janice, we'll go back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. So let me talk a little bit about the bill that we passed last year. This is our outdoor nature-based preschool bill that I was alluding to earlier. That had been set up as a not a fully licensed, licensed with accommodations from the Department of Early Childhood in our state. And so, what this process was, and it was only for half time, and it was really kind of set at a really low ratio that was going to keep providers from being able to expand the program. And so we wanted to expand the program as well as make it UPK eligible. We provide 10 hours, 15 hours currently of United or universal preschool to all families in any kind of a mixed delivery method in Colorado. And so it was really important for me as I started to look at homogenous Colorado and the folks who were able to access these outdoor programs. And it's a really homogenous group, an amazing group of parents and folks, and really wanted to expand that to everyone. So that was a big part of what drove this. So we're working on it. We have to go through a process with the federal government in order to get these funds, because UPK is federally funded. And so, yeah, I appreciate you put that in there, what mixed delivery is. So anyway, that's a big one. We're really excited about it. We too are in a really tough budget year. And so yesterday was the Department of Early Childhood, and it's already on the list of things that they may want to get rid of. And so it's one of those things that we're going to just have to keep talking about and keep pushing to the top. It's a very small, relatively small investment to do this. But, as we started licensing, we started to talk about like toileting and emergency shelters and all of these kinds of things that are very real and very important. But also, how do you make the outdoor experience work for providers and parents as well? So that was that. I'm going to highlight a couple of other Colorado things we're doing. We're working to really decrease the amount of carbon emissions from cars over the course of the next 6 years. And one of those is a transportation plan that's so this is more in the outdoor health realm, I think, but it's about like creating walk ride routes that are safe. So not necessarily just for kiddos, but that's along that line. In the education realm, I'm excited to be carrying a bill that is going to include climate crises as a part of our trauma-informed safety drills in schools. And so our students approached us. Many students are struggling with the climate in an existential way, and it's not something my generation necessarily has lived with. And so it's one of those things that's really important that we beef up, for lack of a better word, to really meet the kids where they are. So it's not much. It's going to be like some legislative declaration language that says this is important, but then it's also we're going to have some trauma-informed policy around climate. And then the final thing I want to talk about is most of our programs to get kids into the outdoors. To get folks into the outdoors is geared toward vets. And one exception to that is we've got under our Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we have a grant funding for outdoor equity. And it's for youth and families to get out into nature. The problem with grants, though, is it's like sprinkling instead of really infusing the money. And so it doesn't always go as far. So that's where I'll stop. Colorado's doing a lot of fun stuff, but happy to entertain any questions at the end too.
Yeah, and so in Nevada, I mentioned that Outdoor Education Advisory Working Group, or AWG. So this group has been, created for the legislative interim. It's made up of representatives from state agencies. We have urban and rural teachers, school administrators, nature education provider, nonprofits. We have healthcare providers. We have a student. We have both bicameral and bipartisan representation from our state legislators. So this group of 16 people, we've spent the past year or so doing research into states like Colorado, right? What have they been doing? What have their communities done to integrate outdoor education into schools? And we identified 4 focus areas, which included capacity building, content integration, outdoor learning infrastructure, and policy. And so thanks to, again, that support from Nature Everywhere and the funding that we got through that, because there was no funding from the state for this effort, we were able to do public feedback on some of those initial ideas and ask Nevadans what they're interested in, what they support, what they want for their youth. And so we did a bilingual survey, as well as several focus groups with particular stakeholder groups. And the results of that public feedback were then integrated into a report that the AWG has written for our state legislature. And that report actually just went live yesterday, so you can read it and digest it. I think there's a link for that. It's ready, so that's really, really exciting. We're big milestone to have that out. Feels really good. And so this report includes some bill recommendations. We have 3 in particular bill recommendations that we had for the legislature, as well as just kind of some further recommendations around those 4 focus areas. So again, I'd encourage you all to check out all of that. And then that original legislation back in 2023 that created the AWG also included provision for the group itself to be allocated a BDR, a bill draft request. And so the AWG's BDR concept that we are pursuing, and actually just got an email that's been submitted, which is exciting, is we're proposing creating a sort of a sustained version of the AWG called the Nevada Outdoor Education Network, which gives and the legislation kind of gives some tasks, some assignments to that network, including developing and administering a outdoor school designation, which is similar to you've heard of like STEM certified or STEM designated schools. We have those in Nevada. So it would outline, some rubric around different levels of how you can become a designated outdoor school. And that would include things like climate resilient, green schoolyards, and integrating the outdoors into curriculum, and all kinds of different things that can be possible with creating a designation. It also includes, recognizing outstanding outdoor educators in schools and providing technical assistance to schools looking to develop outdoor education initiatives. So we're hoping to do that with this group. And then on top of our bill, again, there's further recommendations that can be made into their own pieces of legislation for this upcoming session, or, hopefully down the road. We hope that it kind of can build on itself. And our lieutenant governor actually is a Republican lieutenant governor. His name's Stavros Anthony. And he only gets, 3 bill draft requests, but he's using one of them to pursue protecting recess and also some resolutions around encouraging outdoor education, and has pulled that from the AWG's work and from this report. So again, we have a lot of bipartisan support for this, and it's been really exciting. I think everyone's excited and on board, and it's just about figuring out how to make it happen.
Well, thank you both so much. I think this is exactly the kind of inspiring stories people were zooming in to hear about, to know that are still moving forward in our states across the country. This is awesome. Lots to learn from both of your states and your work. We also wanted to we have 2 more questions left for this panel, and then we're going to leave the last 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you're in the room and you have questions for these awesome women, please do drop them in the chat. David and Grant will keep an eye out on those questions. But we wanted to give you all a chance to speak to advocacy strategies that are working and what needs improvement to see these bills and these efforts across the finish line.
Okay, I'll start. I would say a lobbyist was necessary for us. So I just want to put that out there. In order to get this to be a good bipartisan bill, it really kind of required that. That might just be the nature of our legislature, but I just want to put it out there that the collaborative, so we have a collaborative too. It's a group of outdoor nature-based providers and parents. And what they were trying to do was put pressure on the state to get what they wanted, the full day licensing. And it didn't work without a lobbyist. So the lobby really helped us. So I just want to start with that. The second thing that I'll say about that is, oh no, I'm going to wait and talk about that in the next. I know what the next question is, so I'm going to wait. Sorry.
So, for my part, I work for a state agency, so I'm not allowed to lobby or advocate really. I'm part of the executive branch and have to do what the governor would like us to do, which can be particularly tricky in a state where the legislature and governor have been at odds for the past couple of years. So we rely on partners to do advocacy. My job is to keep people informed, right? So I keep a contact list of people who have been interested in this work and send them information and updates, and then they can use that however they would like to. And the advantage of this advisory working group is that we have more than just state agencies in that group, right? So we have people like our legislators and our nonprofit partners and teachers who can be the voice for the AWG and for this legislation when session starts without the restrictions that we have as a state agency. So again, I'm just there to keep people informed on what's happening with our bill, when are there hearings. We're doing a press release around the report and supporting people and being able to get the information out there about what's going on.
Thanks, you two. And our final question is, we would love to hear more about how you are engaging youth in policy work in your states or advocacy efforts. How has youth found their voice in your movements?
That's cool. I love that question because so often I think we assume that their voices are being represented, and so often they're really not. And so I appreciate the question. In Colorado, we have a thing called the Youth Advisory Council, and we've got 35 Senate districts. We get a student from age 14 to 19, who is in one of those Senate districts, and then we have some rural and LGBTQ and some other specific types of students. We got 40 kids, and in some states they operate like a Senate or a House, and they do things like that. In our state, they just stakehold. They try to figure out what they want to do, and they bring it to us. And us being the legislators, I'm the chair of that, and so we bring their issues forward through that way. One of the bills they brought forward this year, they're all related to climate, but one of the bills they brought forward was adding to our climate justice, it's our environmental justice advisory group, adding a youth or two to that. And so once we figured out how to make sure they're not like voting members or whatever and who appoints them, that's going to be an easy thing, and that's going to get the kids involved too. So I find that we have to really create avenues to ask them for their help because they have some pretty well-defined ideas of what they think things should look like. So thank you.
Yeah, and I mentioned, I think that in the AWG, we have had a student, Representative Sean, is a high school student here in Carson City. And he has been so phenomenal to work with. And I know he's excited to continue working on the project as we go into session and to help present, our bill to the legislature, which I think anytime you can have a kid do that, do it because it's good tactic, and I think it's impactful to hear these youth voices in those kinds of contexts. And then, Sean was able to host one of our focus groups with his peers from school. So we have, a focus group of just youth voices. We also did another focus group with University of Nevada, Reno students in the Outdoor Adventure Leadership Program, because we know that, they are the future of this outdoor education workforce in Nevada as well. And then, in our survey, we're proud to have heard from over 200 youth in that survey out of the 700-ish people who completed that. So we've had that integrated kind of within this whole project. And then, for the future, the bill proposing this outdoor education network includes a youth seat. Again, I think we've definitely, through having Sean, seen how valuable that is to have him, or have a youth, at least one youth, included in that continued effort. We, in proposing this network, had to kind of whittle down this group of 16 to like either 7 or 9 people. So, some of the people who've been at the table previously won't get to going forward. But it is, important to us that we keep that youth seat involved in the work. So.
That's incredible. I think this really speaks to both y'all's backgrounds in education, working with young people, knowing that it's really important to have them involved in these conversations. And it also addresses the issues that Grant brought up earlier about hope and solutions needing to be part of our education system. And letting young people have a seat at the table gives them the confidence and the autonomy to combat that climate anxiety that Janice mentioned earlier, that a lot of youth in her state, and I think all over the country, are feeling. So the more adults like you in the room that open the door for young people, I think the better off we all are. So thank you so much for centering that in your work. It's really powerful. We are going to bring Grant and David back up into this conversation for the rest of the panel, the rest of this webinar, so that they can chime in and answer questions. If you had any questions for Grant about some of the bills that he had mentioned that we're highlighting in our trends report, the Youth Outdoor Policy Partnership Trends Report, or David on his work at Children in Nature Network, or for me on climate education policy, we are also here to answer your questions, but we certainly want to open up the floor so you can hear more from Janice and Kendall.
And there are 2 questions in Q&A already.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, and if you look in there, there's one for Senator Marchman about children's access to recess or break time. Play doesn't stop at 5th grade. So also insights on middle school. So anything that you might have to add. Grant also put a great couple of examples around the country in the queue.
Oh, that's good. I'm going to have to go look at those because I will say this is an area we need to improve. With such an emphasis on test scores and that instructional time, schools, and it's so big though. It's like the teacher union and the negotiated hours that have been said they're going to work. Anyway, all of it results in 30 minutes to eat and go outside. And it's just not, we are really doing a disservice to our students. We live in a cold climate in Colorado, and I always pride myself in the fact that I work at a school and in a district where unless it's below 13 degrees, those kids are going out. Like they are going out unless it's like raining and snowing, because we know that going outside is so good for their, for their nervous systems, for their physical, for eating, all of that. So I just want to say, like, amen, I get you. And we are doing this very wrong generally. And so so in Colorado, the problem we have is it's a local control state. So we can't go tell a school district what to do. which kind of hems us in a bit. But I would encourage, and there have been policies that have come up here that have not passed, but I would encourage at least an hour. And then the other stuff that I'm seeing that's really working well, like even given the constraints, is providing equipment that kids can play with. And so providing balls and just manipulative things that the kids can play with outside has actually been something that's been helpful in getting kids to really enjoy being outside, as well as if teachers would be willing, or if volunteers are able to come in to organize actual group games. There are fun group games that middle schoolers love to play. Like that is mainly what they want to do, is play games. And so I think that there are a lot of, creative ways to get adults who would facilitate that around the kids. Like when I do a lunch duty, we play a game. So, but your mileage might vary.
All right, well, I'm going to jump to the other questions coming in on the Q&A. There's a question from Chad on how municipal recreation departments can work in coordination with state DCR groups to better foster nature and outdoor opportunities.
Yeah, I can speak to that a bit. So I would say, I'm not sure what state you're in, Chad, but there are 21 to 25-ish states now that have a state office of outdoor recreation. So I would definitely call on them. They're typically small and easy to reach divisions. We, here at Endor, we work with municipal recreation departments all the time. And I also, I think they just are, I think they're there to help and they want to help, but it definitely takes like a little bit of initiative on the part of like a municipality in terms of like working with the state. Often the state is, it's stretched thin and they have a lot of people that they need to serve, but I would say like the greasy wheel gets the grease, or the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of a thing, right? So I would say, go to them and talk to them about what they want, what you want to do, and what federal funding opportunities they could help you pursue, and what other assistance they could provide.
Grant, I saw you nodding your head vigorously there. Was there anything you wanted to second in that answer?
Oh, I just want to second that you should definitely reach out to outdoor recreation departments are very busy and do a lot with very little. And they're also, in my experience, have always been very eager to reach back out and somehow tackle more things. So I want to give kudos to Kendall Scott. Like you are one of the busiest people I know. And also I've never seen you shy away from taking another thing on. So I love that recommendation.
That's the good thing about outdoor recreation, is that people get in it for the love of it.
Shout out to all the Leslie Nopes of the world. The next question we have is if anybody has any examples of certified public forest schools that operate in any states at the pre-K through 8th grade level. Public forest schools. Janice?
So forest schools are another way of saying outdoor nature-based schools. So at least the way I see it. And so I can tell you in the ECE realm, it is literally us and Washington State who has licensed programs. And one of the things I failed to mention earlier in collaboration was we did work closely with the Washington State folks who had implemented this. And I'm super excited about the fact that you guys have a bigger coalition. I think that's going to be really huge to get things done at the state level. So.
And I'll say, I don't know, I can't think of any elementary schools that are public forest schools that I can think of. One thing that I want to note though is outdoor schools, which are, can provide anywhere from a few days to a week to longer of public school students to access nature or overnight camps. That is a growing movement. I know Washington, Oregon, Maine, I think, has a new one, if I'm remembering right. So they're starting to bubble up as well. To again, it's not a forest school, but it's just a way to have more of teaching and learning happen in nature, at least part of the year.
All right. We also have a question. Oh, Janice, did you want to add?
I was just going to say, when I was talking to my coalition, the group of folks who brought this piece to me, I said, "This is so great. We're going to get this all set up for your preschool kiddos. What happens when they go to elementary school? This is such a great fit for so many kids. How do we continue that progress?" And like David said, there aren't a lot of public schools, but in Colorado, we have a thing called innovation zones. And I wish we could see more of these schools. Play out in the elementary school arena, even in middle school, frankly.
Could not agree more. We have a question about programs or initiatives mentioned capturing data or conducting research to document the benefits of being outdoors, such as student health, academic benefits. I know that Children in Nature Network has an incredible research library that captures and highlights a lot of the research on the benefits of being outdoors. Same with the North American Association of Environmental Education. We have a webpage called EE Works that details why environmental education works and addresses those issues. So I highly recommend checking out those resource libraries. Did anyone else, Kendall or Janice, are you guys doing any kind of evaluation at this point on efforts?
We used a lot of the same resources that you mentioned in our report, and our data collection was really around like public opinion, more so than data about like particular physical or mental health benefits. But there's so much research now out there about that it exists, and it's easily accessible with those resources that Megan mentioned.
And I see an awesome question from Kat with the Nature Conservancy. I do want to jump, since we only have 2 minutes left, to the specific question for Janice. I would be happy to follow up with you on this climate education questions, Kat, if you want to shoot me an email or email David and Grant and I. But specifically for Janice from Karen, we have a question saying that we are representing 6 counties in Southeast Colorado and would love to connect with you. Our CNE pilot project is to develop youth-designed outdoor nature-based classrooms, and we believe we can learn so much from you and are seeking allies in our region like you.
You got me. You had me at the beginning. So that sounds great. Just send me an email if you don't mind. I'm Janice at janiceforcolorado.com, and I spell it all out. So thank you.
Yeah. And I think we're at our last minute. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank everybody for Zooming in and being excited to move forward together. We just wrapped up our national conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the week of the election. And it was really wonderful to be surrounded by like-minded individuals like we have here today, who are going to keep moving the ball forward for youth and for environmental education and for protecting gorgeous natural spaces. We got to hear from 2 incredible keynote speakers who study the work of Mr. Rogers, and they reminded us that Mr. Rogers tells his audience to search for the helpers in times of transition and turbulence, and you all are the helpers. We are the helpers. So we get to help our youth connect to nature and the outdoors, and we thank you so much for being here to learn alongside us, ask these thoughtful questions, and we hope you'll come back and continue to learn with us.
Feel free to reach out to me, Grant at ncelenviro.org.
Thank you.